Michael Hall, a successful lawyer with an impressive career, was walking through the bustling streets of New York, trying to suppress a growing sense of unease. He had just won a case that brought his firm a massive payout, yet inside, he felt nothing but emptiness. Everything he had achieved seemed meaningless. The biting January wind stung his face as he turned into a narrow alley, intending to take a shortcut home. The dim streetlights illuminated piles of garbage and graffiti-covered walls, but it was here that his attention was drawn to a lone figure. A woman sat on a damp cardboard box, clutching her stomach. Her face, framed by light but disheveled hair, was pale, and her eyes brimmed with pain. "Hey, are you okay?" Michael asked hesitantly as he approached her. The woman lifted her head, looking at him warily. "Go away," she said in a hoarse voice. "I don't need anything." Michael felt something click inside him. His usual indifference cracked. "Are you here alone?" he asked, taking another cautious step forward, trying to appear non-threatening. "What's it to you?" she snapped, though her voice carried no real anger, only exhaustion. Michael raised his hands, signaling that he meant no harm. "My name is Michael. I'm not here to scare you. I just thought you might need some help." The woman was silent for a long time, studying him. Finally, she replied, "Laura. And no, I don't need your charity." "Then maybe just a cup of hot coffee," he offered with a faint smile. Laura narrowed her eyes but eventually gave a hesitant nod. Michael helped her to her feet, noticing how she clutched her stomach, and led her toward the nearest diner. The warm light of the small coffee shop spilled across the room, a stark contrast to the cold outside. Laura froze at the entrance, her eyes scanning the wooden tables and the few patrons quietly chatting over their cups of coffee. "Pick a spot," Michael suggested, stepping ahead to hold the door open for her. Laura nodded and chose the farthest corner, away from prying eyes. Michael placed a cup of coffee in front of her, along with a small plate holding a sandwich. "That's unnecessary," she mumbled, though she didn't push the food away. "Just eat," Michael said gently, taking a seat across from her. Minutes passed in silence. Laura cautiously broke small pieces off the sandwich, as if afraid it might disappear. Michael, doing his best to hide his unease, took a few sips of his coffee. "Have you been in New York long?" he asked at last, attempting to start a conversation. Laura set the food down, clearly deliberating whether to answer. "A couple of months," she replied briefly. "Do you have family or friends here?" No. Laura's eyes met his, full of wary tension. "Do you always interrogate strangers like this?" Michael gave a slight smile. "Habit. My job requires it." "And what kind of job is that?" "Lawyer," he replied calmly. Laura let out a sarcastic snort, lowering her gaze. "Of course. A rich lawyer and a homeless woman. What a classic storyline." Michael tensed but kept his composure. "Laura, I don't know your story, but I don't want you to think this is some kind of game to me." "You don't owe me anything." Laura scrutinized him, as if deciding whether to believe him. "In that case, why are you here? Why didn't you just walk past?" The question caught Michael off guard. He wasn't entirely sure himself why this encounter had moved him so deeply. "Because you reminded me that I'm still capable of seeing people. Not just cases, contracts, and numbers," he admitted honestly. Laura tilted her head slightly, as if contemplating his words. "All right, Michael," she finally said, her tone softening a bit. "Thank you for the coffee." "And the sandwich." Michael smiled, sensing the ice between them beginning to thaw. "Will you at least let me walk you home?" Laura sighed but didn't object. Michael walked Laura through the deserted streets, dimly lit by scattered streetlights. She walked slightly ahead, keeping a deliberate distance, but her exhaustion was all too evident. "You don't have to walk with me," she called over her shoulder, her tone more embarrassed than harsh. "I know," Michael replied calmly. "I just want to make sure you'll be okay." And what if I'm not? Laura suddenly turned sharply, her eyes flashing with anger. What will you do then? Buy me a new life? Solve all my problems just to feel like a hero? Michael froze, stunned by her words. No, he said quietly. I can't fix everything, but I can at least try to help. Laura turned away, staring into the darkness. I'm sorry, she said after a moment. I didn't mean to snap. It's all right, Michael replied. It seems like you've been through a lot. Laura let out a dry laugh. That's putting it mildly. They turned into a narrow alley. Laura stopped in front of an old brick building with peeling paint on the door. This is my home, she said, gesturing toward the entrance that led to a dilapidated staircase. You live here? Michael tried to mask his shock, but Laura caught it. It's better than the streets, she shrugged. As long as it doesn't rain. Michael looked at her, a wave of guilt washing over him. He thought about his spacious loft in the heart of Manhattan, cold and impersonal, yet undeniably comfortable. Laura, this isn't right, he finally said. She looked at him with irritation. I've lived in a messed-up world long enough to get used to it, Michael. He couldn't accept her resignation. At least let me pay for a few nights at a hotel. It's not charity, just a human gesture. Laura hesitated, remaining silent for a long time as if wrestling with herself. I can't let you do that, she said at last. And I can't just walk away knowing you'll sleep here, Michael replied firmly. She looked at him, something akin to gratitude flickering in her eyes. Fine, Laura sighed, as if surrendering. But only for a couple of days. Michael smiled and pulled out his phone. An hour later, they arrived at a cozy boarding house on the outskirts of the city. Laura reluctantly accepted the keys to her room and thanked him curtly. This is temporary, she said, glancing around the modest but clean room. As you wish, Michael agreed. But if you need anything, let me know. Laura looked as if she wanted to say something, but simply nodded and closed the door behind her. Michael descended the stairs, feeling a strange sense of relief. Yet a heaviness lingered. He knew that behind those brief moments of gratitude lay deep pain and a complicated story. He resolved to come back tomorrow to learn more. The next morning, Michael found himself back at the boarding house. Laura was on the porch, seemingly ready to head out. She looked slightly better, her face less tired, her movements more assured. Good morning, Michael greeted as he approached. Morning, Laura replied curtly. Why are you here? I just wanted to check on you. She squinted at him, studying his face. You're a strange man, Michael. Most people just walk by. But you decided to meddle in a stranger's life. Maybe because my own life feels too empty, he admitted honestly. Laura unexpectedly smiled, though there was more bitterness than humor in it. All right, since you're so curious, she said, sitting down on one of the benches. I'll tell you. Michael sat beside her, careful not to show how intently he was listening. I'm from Las Vegas, Laura began, staring into the distance. I used to dance in one of the big shows there. Not a star, but it was a good job. I thought I'd found my place. Then she paused, taking a deep breath. Then he came along, she continued quietly. Charming, confident. He gave me a beautiful life, flowers, gifts, talks about a future together. But then came the shouting, then the threats. And when I found out I was pregnant, it only got worse. Michael watched her intently, resisting the urge to interrupt. I ran away, Laura said, her voice growing firmer. I left everything behind and ended up here in New York. No money, no friends. I just wanted my baby to have a chance at a normal life. She sighed, shaking her head. And now what? Michael asked softly. I don't know, Laura shrugged. I've run out of plans. He was silent for a long moment before speaking with quiet determination. Let's start small. You need a medical checkup, and I'll help you find a place where you can feel safe. You want to take over my whole life? Laura smirked, though her tone lacked disdain. No, Michael said, shaking his head. I just want to make sure you have a chance. What you do with it is up to you. Laura studied him closely. Are you always this stubborn? Always, Michael replied with a faint smile. Laura sighed, but her expression softened. All right, lawyer. Let's see what you can do. And so, their partnership began. Over the next few days, Michael helped Laura schedule a doctor's appointment and secure temporary housing at a women's shelter. She remained reserved but expressed her gratitude in subtle ways, an occasional smile or sharing her thoughts like she might with a close friend. As Michael watched her determination take shape, he felt something profound shift within himself. Several months passed. Michael found himself visiting the center where Laura lived more and more often. They rarely spoke about the future, but the tension in their conversations gradually faded. Laura grew more confident, her habit of avoiding eye contact and giving vague answers slowly disappearing. Michael was still amazed at how much that chance encounter had changed him. In the mornings, he thought about how Laura was doing. During the day, he checked on her progress at the center, and in the evenings, he often caught himself remembering her smile. One morning, his phone rang. Laura's number flashed on the screen. Michael, her voice was tense but soft. I think it's time. Time, he repeated, not immediately understanding. The baby, she said shortly. Where are you? He asked immediately, already getting to his feet. 20 minutes later, Michael was sitting in a cold hospital waiting room, anxiously waiting for news. Time seemed to stand still, but the nervous energy inside him grew with each passing minute. When a nurse finally came out, he jumped to his feet, unable to wait any longer. Everything's fine, she said with a warm smile. It's a girl. Michael let out a breath of relief. Can I see them? He asked. The nurse nodded and led him to the room. Laura was lying on the bed, looking exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle, sleeping peacefully. Meet Haley, Laura said softly when she saw Michael. He stepped closer, feeling a warm, unfamiliar sensation spreading through his chest. She's beautiful, he murmured, staring at the baby's delicate face. You're the first person to see her besides me, Laura said, her eyes meeting his. Thank you for trusting me, Michael replied, his voice filled with genuine emotion. Laura smiled, her eyes brimming with gratitude and tenderness. I thought I could do this alone, she said quietly. But I'm glad you were there. Michael didn't respond with words, but the look in his eyes said everything. He knew this moment had changed their lives forever. In the following weeks, Michael continued to support Laura. He bought essentials for Haley, arranged for social services to provide additional help, and stayed by their side. His colleagues and friends were bewildered, struggling to understand why a successful lawyer had taken on such a responsibility. You've changed, his friend Alex said one day. Maybe, Michael replied, glancing at a photo of Laura and Haley that now sat on his desk. But for the first time in a long while, it feels like the right change. Michael began spending more time with Laura and Haley. Gradually, he realized that this wasn't just a sense of duty, he had genuinely grown attached to them. One day, when he visited, he saw Laura sitting by the window, holding Haley in her arms and softly singing a lullaby. He stopped in the doorway, afraid to disturb the moment. But in that instant, he understood. It wasn't just Laura and Haley he cared for, it was the future they could share together. A few more months passed. Haley was growing into a healthy, cheerful child, and Laura was becoming increasingly confident. Michael supported her in everything, from small daily tasks to major decisions. More and more, he noticed a spark in her eyes that life's hardships had once extinguished. One evening, after Haley had fallen asleep, Laura called Michael into the kitchen. I want to show you something, she said, holding a box in her hands. Michael sat at the table, watching as she carefully pulled out a few old fabrics, brightly adorned with rhinestones and feathers. "This is all I have left from Las Vegas," she explained. "Parts of the costumes I used to perform in." Michael looked at her in surprise. "Why did you keep them?" "I don't know," Laura shrugged. "Maybe because they reminded me of who I was. Of the fact that I had talent, even if it wasn't in high demand." She placed a piece of fabric on the table, her fingers tracing it thoughtfully. "Sometimes I feel like I stopped being someone. But then I remembered how I once altered a stage costume for a friend, adding details to it. She told me back then that I could have a knack for design." Michael smiled. "Do you want to give it a try?" Laura nodded, her face a mixture of shyness and determination. "I want to create something new out of these scraps. Maybe accessories. Start small." Michael leaned forward. "That's a fantastic idea. If you go for it, I'll help you with any legal or organizational stuff." Laura gave him a faint smile. "You're always offering help that's hard to refuse." "I just want you to have a chance, Laura," Michael said gently. Over the next week, Laura began working on her creations. She crafted bracelets, earrings, and decorative pieces for clothing using the remnants of her costumes. Gradually, she started sharing photos of her work on social media. To her surprise, they caught people's attention. Comments poured in, praising her taste and originality. Before long, she received her first order. "You sold it?" Michael asked, astonished, as he watched her pack a small bracelet for shipping. "Yes," Laura said shyly. "It's just a start, of course." But with each passing day, her confidence grew. Laura began studying marketing basics, interacting with customers, and slowly building a small business model. "You know," she told Michael one evening over tea, "I thought all I had left were memories of the past. But it turns out the past can be the foundation for something new." Michael smiled, watching her face light up with a radiance he hadn't seen before. "You're not just building something new, Laura," he said. "You're reclaiming yourself." His words seemed to move her. She sat silently for a while before softly replying, "Thank you, Michael. I couldn't have done this without you." But Michael shook his head. "You did this yourself. I just helped you believe you could." Laura gave him a small, heartfelt smile, feeling, perhaps for the first time, that her life truly belonged to her again. By the end of the year, Laura's business had gained unexpected momentum. Her unique accessories were in high demand on social media, with glowing reviews pouring in. Some clients even began proposing collaborations. One day, Laura received an invitation for an interview with a local online magazine dedicated to women entrepreneurs. "They want me to share my story," she told Michael, showing him the email. "This is an amazing opportunity," he said, beaming with pride. "You deserve for people to know about you." Though nervous, Laura agreed. The interview took place in a cozy studio, where she shared her journey, her experiences as a mother, and how she managed to start over from scratch. A week after the interview was published, it went viral. People were inspired by her story, leaving comments about how she exemplified resilience and strength. "Look at this," Michael said proudly, showing her the countless online messages. "People believe in you, just like I do." Laura smiled, but her joy was interrupted by an unexpected phone call. "It's me," said a voice on the other end, sending a shiver down her spine. "What do you want?" she asked coldly, gripping the phone tightly. "To congratulate you on your success," her ex-partner replied, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I'm glad you found a way to paint yourself as the victim." Laura turned pale but kept her emotions in check. "You'd better stay out of my life," she said, her voice steady. "Oh, I'm not interfering," he said, clearly enjoying her discomfort. "But you know the truth always comes out." After hanging up, Laura sank into a chair, anxiety welling up inside her. "What's wrong?" Michael asked, coming closer. She told him about the call. Michael stayed silent for a moment before speaking firmly. "Don't let him intimidate you. If he tries to harm your reputation, I'll be here to protect you." Despite his reassurance, Laura couldn't shake her unease. A few days later, her ex appeared on a popular talk show. He openly accused Laura of manipulating public opinion and crafting a victim narrative to gain sympathy and success. The story spread rapidly. Social media erupted with debates. Many continued to support Laura, but some began to doubt her. "What should I do?" she asked Michael when the noise became too overwhelming. "They're tearing down everything I've built." "We'll tell your truth," he said calmly. Michael contacted the talk show's producers and insisted they give Laura the chance to respond. When Laura and Michael arrived at the studio, the tension was palpable. As her ex tried to hurl accusations again, Michael, sitting beside her, interrupted. "With your permission, I'd like to set the record straight," he said firmly. He recounted their meeting in the alley, her struggles to move forward, and the relentless effort she put into rebuilding her life. His words were clear, heartfelt, and unwavering. "Laura isn't a victim," Michael concluded. "She's someone who rose above her circumstances with incredible determination." Her ex attempted to argue, but the audience had already made up their minds. The show ended with thunderous applause. After the episode aired, Laura received an influx of new orders. Her story gained even wider recognition, and a local newspaper described her as a beacon of resilience and inner strength. That evening, Michael showed up at Laura's home with a bouquet of flowers. "You've earned this triumph," he said, handing her the bouquet. Laura smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "Thank you, Michael. I couldn't have done this without you." He took her hand, his gaze filled with warmth. "You did it on your own, Laura," he said softly. "I was just here to walk beside you." After her triumphant appearance on the talk show, Laura felt a long-awaited sense of relief. She walked home with Michael, holding his hand. The night was quiet, and New York glimmered with millions of lights, as if the city itself was celebrating her victory. "I never thought I'd sit in front of cameras and share my story," she confessed, glancing at Michael. "Thank you for being there." "You would have managed without me," he said with a gentle smile. "But I'm glad I could support you." As they reached her home, Laura suddenly stopped. "Michael," she began, her voice thoughtful, "you've done so much for me and Haley. I don't even know how I could ever repay you." "You already have," he replied, looking into her eyes. "You've given me something I hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of purpose." Laura nodded, her face lighting up with a smile Michael had grown to love. Despite her success, life wasn't without its challenges. A few weeks after the talk show, Laura received a notification from an investor she had recently partnered with. He claimed that the lingering controversy surrounding her past was damaging his company's reputation and announced plans to terminate their agreement. "This is ridiculous," she said to Michael, throwing the papers onto the table in frustration. "We just started working together, and now they're backing out. I'm losing everything again." Michael studied the documents carefully. "This isn't the end," he said confidently. "If they're breaking the agreement without cause, they're in violation of the terms." "And what do you suggest? Take them to court?" Laura asked, her voice tinged with nervous laughter. "If necessary, yes," Michael said calmly. Laura sank into a chair, her confidence faltering. "I can't go through this again." Michael sat beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone, Laura. I'm here with you." Michael tackled the issue with his usual tenacity. After several meetings with lawyers and negotiations with the investor, he not only reinstated the agreement but also secured additional funding for Laura's business. With the investor's support and Michael's guidance, Laura was able to expand her online store. She opened a small studio where she worked on her accessories and eventually hired 2 assistants. One evening, returning home after a long day at the studio, Laura found Michael playing with Haley. They were sitting on the floor, surrounded by toys, laughing together. "You two look like you're managing just fine without me," she said with a smile, leaning against the doorway. Michael looked up and winked. "We're just practicing for when you're busy saving the design world." "What a charming lawyer we have," she teased, walking closer. Michael stood up, holding Haley in his arms. "I just want you and Haley to be happy," he said softly. Laura froze for a moment, her eyes warm and filled with emotion. "We are happy," she said, "because you're here." That night, after Haley had fallen asleep, Michael and Laura sat on the couch with glasses of wine. They talked about her future plans, but the conversation gradually turned more personal. "You know," Michael began, staring into his glass, "I never thought I could care this much about anyone." "Surprised yourself?" Laura asked with a smile. He turned to her. "You and Haley have become more to me than I ever imagined. You've become my family." Laura wasn't expecting to hear that. She was silent for a while, but her eyes reflected emotions she couldn't hide. "Michael," she began, placing her hand over his, "I was afraid I'd never trust a man again. But you've shown me that trust is possible. And honestly—" her voice wavered. "I'm scared of how much you mean to me." Michael smiled and, holding her hand, said softly, "You don't have to be scared. I'm not going anywhere." He leaned in, and their lips met in a gentle, tender kiss that felt like a promise of something greater. From that evening on, their relationship deepened. Michael began staying over more often, and Laura's studio became a place where they spent time together as a family. One morning, while walking through the park with Haley, Michael unexpectedly said, "Have you ever thought about moving?" "Moving where?" Laura asked, looking at him. "To a house big enough for the three of us." Laura froze, processing his words. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely," he said firmly. "I want this to be the start of a new chapter for us." Laura smiled, her heart swelling with joy. "Then I'm in."